The waves seemed calm, lapping gently against the pier. But below, the shadows moved with purpose, hunting in silence. A sudden tug on the line sent shivers down my spine. What surfaced wasn't a fish, but a nightmare made flesh. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start with today's shark attack story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are watching from. Click the like button, and let's get into the story. The sun rose over Clearwater Beach, casting a golden glow on the white sand and the gentle waves rolling against the shore. It was a picture-perfect morning, the kind Ryan Callahan had grown used to in his 7 years as a lifeguard. Standing at the edge of the lifeguard tower, he sipped from his water bottle, scanning the horizon. "Water looks calm today," Emma remarked from behind him, leaning on the rail with her binoculars. Ryan nodded. "No wind, no strong currents, textbook conditions. Should be an easy one." He set his bottle down and adjusted the strap on his rescue can. The red flotation device had become a natural extension of him, a symbol of the countless lives he'd helped save. "I'll do the perimeter swim," Ryan said, grabbing his fins and slipping them over his feet. Emma frowned slightly. "You sure you want to go in? It's your day to run drills, not patrol." "Yeah, I'm sure. It's too nice out to just sit around. Besides, routine checks keep us sharp," Ryan replied with a grin. "I'll be back in 15. Emma shrugged, her eyes briefly scanning the beachgoers setting up umbrellas and chairs. "All right, just don't keep me waiting. You know I hate covering your shift." Ryan chuckled and gave her a mock salute. "Yes, ma'am." He jogged toward the waterline, relishing the feel of the cool, wet sand under his feet. As he waded in, the familiar sensation of the ocean embraced him, a mix of serenity and respect. The water was clearer than usual, sunlight cutting through the surface and illuminating the sandy bottom below. Small schools of fish darted around his legs, their silver bodies flashing like shards of light. Ryan swam out past the shallows, establishing his rhythm with steady strokes. _1 2 breathe. 1 2 breathe. _ Out in the deeper water, he paused to tread water and scan the area. The beach was beginning to come alive with families, joggers, and the occasional paddleboarder. Everything looked normal. Ryan took another deep breath and dove down, his fingers grazing the seabed as he swam parallel to the shore. He loved these moments of solitude, just him and the ocean. Back on the tower, Emma watched his progress through her binoculars. "Still showing off," she muttered to herself. Chink, another lifeguard, climbed the stairs, carrying a thermos. "Ryan out there again? Guy's like a fish." Emma handed him the binoculars. "Yeah, but he's been down there a while. He's supposed to be checking currents, not sightseeing." Jake smirked. "He'll be fine. Ryan's done this 1,000 times." Emma's reply was cut short by a movement in the water that caught her eye, a shadow, faint but deliberate, cutting through the shallows. "Sunk. Look at this," she said, her voice sharpening. Jake squinted through the binoculars. "Probably a tarpon. They've been schooling out here all week." "Maybe," Emma said, but a chill crept up her spine. Ryan surfaced, exhaling a burst of air. He wiped his face and took another long look around. Everything seemed calm, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something wasn't right. He began swimming back toward shore, maintaining a steady pace. As he moved, a shadow passed beneath him. It was so fleeting that he almost didn't register it, but his instincts kicked in. He stopped and turned, scanning the water. "Okay," he murmured to himself, his pulse quickening. "Relax, Callahan. Probably a dolphin or a ray." But the shadow returned, this time larger and unmistakable. It moved with a purposeful grace, circling him. Ryan's breath hitched. "Emma!" he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him from this distance. Up on the tower, Emma's heart sank as she saw Ryan flail in the water. "Something's wrong," she yelled, grabbing her whistle and blowing it sharply. Jake leaned over the rail. "What the hell is he doing? Is he panicking?" No, that's not panic, Emma said, already sprinting down the steps. That's trouble. Ryan knew now what he was dealing with. The shark wasn't massive, maybe 7 or 8 feet, but it was solid, powerful, and getting closer. His training flashed through his mind. _ don't splash. Stay calm. Keep eyes on it. _ the bull shark turned sharply and came straight for him. He didn't have time to think, only to act. When the shark hit, it was like being slammed by a truck. Its jaws clamped onto his left leg, and the pain was instant and blinding. Ryan screamed, kicking with his free leg and pounding the shark's snout with his fists. On the shore, Emma skidded to a stop, scanning the water. Ryan's head bobbed in the distance, and she saw the unmistakable crimson of blood blooming around him. "Cenk, call 911, she shouted. Jake fumbled for the radio, his face pale. "We've got an active shark attack. Lifeguard down, west of Tower 2. Send help now." Ryan fought with everything he had, but the shark's grip was relentless. It shook him violently, pulling him underwater. The taste of salt and blood filled his mouth as he struggled to surface. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he was done. But his training came back to him, a last-ditch move. He jammed his fingers into the shark's gills, digging with all his strength. The shark released him and he surfaced, gasping. His leg was useless, torn apart, but he wasn't dead. Not yet. "Help!" he screamed, his voice hoarse. Emma was already in the water, swimming toward him like her life depended on it. Behind her, Jake grabbed a rescue board and followed. "Ryan, hold on," Emma shouted, pushing herself harder. Ryan's head tilted toward her, his eyes wide with fear and pain. "It's still here," he yelled. The shark circled again, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface. Emma reached Ryan just as the shark made another pass. She threw herself between them, swinging the rescue buoy at the predator. "Get off him!" she screamed, her voice raw. The shark veered away, its dark silhouette disappearing into the depths. Jake reached them moments later, calling Ryan onto the rescue board. Blood poured from the wound in his leg, staining the water. "Stay with me, Ryan," Emma pleaded, pressing her hand against his shredded flesh to stem the bleeding. Ryan's lips trembled. "Didn't. It won't stop," he muttered, his voice fading. "It will," Emma said, her voice shaking. "We've got you. You're not dying today." As they paddled furiously back to shore, the beach erupted into chaos. Tourists screamed and pointed. Mothers pulled their children out of the water, and sirens wailed in the distance. Emma's focus never wavered. She kept her eyes on Ryan, his breathing shallow but steady. "You're gonna make it," she whispered, more to herself than him. Behind them, the water calmed again, the shark's shadow gone, swallowed by the endless blue. The water was cool against Ryan Callahan's skin, but it offered no comfort as he swam back toward shore. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The beach looked so peaceful, so normal, with families lounging under umbrellas and kids chasing each other near the surf. Yet beneath the surface, Ryan's instincts screamed danger. A faint ripple behind him made him stop and tread water. He turned, scanning the turquoise expanse, but saw nothing. "Just nerves," he muttered to himself, trying to force calm into his voice. "You've done this 100 times. He resumed swimming, focusing on the rhythm of his strokes. _1, 2, breathe. 1, 2, breathe. But then he felt it. A shift in the water pressure of presence. Ryan froze. He turned slowly and saw the shadow. It wasn't small and it wasn't far. It moved with a deliberate, menacing grace, circling him. "No, no, no," Ryan whispered, his chest tightening. He knew what it was. He trained for this scenario countless times, watched safety videos, read incident reports. He understood the risks of patrolling these waters, but knowing wasn't the same as facing it. Up on the lifeguard tower, Emma squinted through the binoculars, trying to make sense of Ryan's sudden change in behavior. He had stopped swimming and was now spinning in place, his head darting around. "What's he doing?" she murmured, lowering the binoculars. Jake, sitting nearby, looked up from his thermos. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Something's not right," Emma said, raising the binoculars again. "He's just..." stopped. Then she saw it, a dark fin slicing through the water behind him. "Oh my God. Chink, it's a shark." Jake jumped to his feet. "You're sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." Emma grabbed the whistle around her neck and blew 3 sharp blasts. The sound echoed across the beach, drawing the attention of nearby swimmers and sunbathers. Ryan heard the whistle, but he was distant, muffled by the pounding of his heart. The shark was closer now, its movements confident and unhurried, as if it knew it had already won. "Stay calm," Ryan whispered, though his voice trembled. "Don't splash. Don't panic." The shark turned, its sleek body arcing as it lined up its approach. Ryan's instincts screamed at him to flee, but he knew better. Turning his back would only invite an attack. "Get away from me," he yelled, thrusting the rescue buoy in the shark's direction. It didn't stop. On the shore, Emma was already sprinting toward the water, shouting over her shoulder. "Call 911, Jake. Now." Jake grabbed the radio, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the controls. "This is Tower 2. We have an active shark attack. Lifeguard in the water, approximately 50 yards out. Send help immediately." The shark struck with the force of a freight train. Its jaws clamped down on Ryan's left leg, and the pain was instant and all-consuming. He screamed, the sound raw and guttural, as the shark began to shake him violently. "Lo, get off me," Ryan shouted, slamming his fists against the predator's snout. The water exploded in a frenzy of movement, Ryan's thrashing, the shark's powerful tail churning up sand and blood. The once clear water turned a murky red, and Ryan's vision blurred with tears and salt. "Stay calm, stay calm," he chanted through gritted teeth. Even as the shark dragged him under, Emma reached the water's edge, her lungs burning as she fought to keep her panic in check. She could see the blood spreading like ink in the shallows, the unmistakable struggle between man and predator. "Ryan!" she screamed, diving into the water without hesitation. Her training kicked in as she swam with powerful strokes, keeping her eyes locked on the chaos ahead. The closer she got, the more horrifying the scene became. "Hold on," she shouted, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. Ryan managed to break the surface, gasping for air as he clawed at the shark's gills. He remembered the training videos. _go for the eyes, the gills, anything sensitive. He jammed his fingers into the gill slits with every ounce of strength he had left. The shark released him, its jaws snapping open as it recoiled. Ryan tried to swim away, but his left leg was useless, shredded beyond recognition. "Help me," he screamed, his voice cracking. Emma reached him just as the shark circled back for another pass. She grabbed his arm and wrapped her other hand around the rescue buoy. "I've got you," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "We're getting out of here." The shark closed the distance with terrifying speed. Emma swung the rescue buoy with all her strength, slamming it against the shark's snout. "Jump back," she screamed, her voice hoarse. The predator hesitated, veering off slightly but remaining close. "Ryan, can you swim?" Emma asked, her eyes darting between him and the shark. Ryan shook his head weakly. "I can't. My leg." "Okay, don't worry. I've got you," Emma said, looping the buoy strap around his chest. "Just hold on." On the shore, Jake stood frozen, watching the nightmare unfold. Beachgoers crowded around him, some shouting, others filming the scene with their phones. "Where's the rescue team?" a woman yelled. Jake snapped out of his daze and grabbed the megaphone. "Everyone out of the water, now!" Emma swam with every ounce of strength she had, towing Ryan behind her. The shark followed, its dorsal fin cutting through the water ominously. "Almost there," she muttered, though the distance to shore felt impossibly far. Ryan's grip on the buoy slackened. I don't think I can. Don't you dare quit on me. Emma snapped, her voice fierce. You're going to make it, Ryan. Just keep breathing. The shark lunged again, its jaws snapping inches from Ryan's trailing leg. Emma kicked at it, connecting with its nose. Get away! She screamed, her voice breaking. The shark veered off, disappearing into the depths as abruptly as it had appeared. When they finally reached the shallows, Jake and 2 other lifeguards rushed to help, dragging Ryan onto the sand. Call for the medics, Emma shouted, collapsing next to him. I already did. They're on their way, Jake replied, pressing a towel against Ryan's mangled leg to stem the bleeding. Ryan's face was pale, his breath shallow. Did it go? Emma nodded, brushing wet hair from her face. Yeah, it's gone. You're safe now. Tears streamed down her face as she gripped his hand. You're going to be okay. Ryan managed a weak smile, though his eyes were filled with pain. Guess I won't be swimming anytime soon. Emma let out a shaky laugh. Shut up, Callahan. Save your strength. The sound of sirens grew louder as the first responders arrived, the chaos on the beach giving way to the grim efficiency of the rescue effort. Ryan was loaded onto a stretcher, his blood staining the pristine sand. As the ambulance doors closed, Emma stood frozen, staring out at the water. It was calm again, as if nothing had happened, but she knew better. The siren of an ambulance wailed faintly in the distance, but it wasn't close enough. Ryan Callahan lay on the sand, barely conscious. Blood pooled around his leg, painting the pristine beach in gruesome streaks. His shredded wetsuit clung to his body, and his breathing was shallow, his face pale and slick with sweat. Emma knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a towel against his torn leg. Blood seeped through the fabric, staining her hands. Her lifeguard training kicked in, keeping her focused even as her stomach churned. Ryan, stay with me, she urged, her voice firm despite the panic clawing at her. Help's coming. Just keep your eyes on me. Ryan's lips moved, but his voice was so faint she had to lean in to hear him. It didn't let go, he whispered, his eyes unfocused. I know, Emma replied, choking back a sob. But you fought it off. You're a damn fighter, Ryan. Don't give up on me now. Jake appeared beside her, his face ashen. He carried a first aid kit and dropped to his knees. What do you need? Tourniquet? Emma barked, not looking up. Now. Jake fumbled with the kit, pulling out a length of elastic bandage. He wrapped it around Ryan's upper thigh, just above the shredded flesh, and tightened it as much as he could. Ryan winced, letting out a weak groan. I'm sorry, buddy, but we've got to stop the bleeding, Jake said, his voice breaking. The crowd around them grew sicker, spectators holding their phones up to record the scene. Parents shielded their children, their faces pale with horror. Back up, Jake shouted, glaring at the crowd. Give us space. A woman with a wide-brimmed hat stepped forward. Is he going to be okay? Gent back, Emma snapped, her eyes blazing. You're not helping. A ripple went through the crowd, and most people stepped back, murmuring amongst themselves. Ryan's head lolled to the side, his breathing shallow and uneven. Emma, he rasped. I'm here, Emma said, leaning over him. You're going to be okay. You hear me? His glassy eyes met hers. Don't let me. You're not dying, Emma said fiercely. Not on my watch. Jake pressed a hand to her shoulder. We've got to move him higher up the beach. The tide's coming in, and this crowd's making it harder for the medics to get through. Emma hesitated, then nodded. All right, on 3. Together, they lifted Ryan as carefully as they could, the rescue board acting as a makeshift stretcher. He let out a weak cry of pain, and Emma whispered soothing words as they carried him toward the tower. The sirens grew louder, and moments later, the ambulance roared onto the beach. 2 paramedics jumped out, their faces set in grim determination. "What have we got?" one of them asked, dropping to his knees beside Ryan. "Bull shark attack," Emma said quickly. "Severe lacerations to the left leg, massive blood loss. Tourniquets in place, but he's fading fast." The paramedic nodded, his hands moving with practiced precision as he assessed the injuries. "We need to get him stabilized. Start in 4 for fluids and prep him for transport." The second paramedic worked quickly, inserting a needle into Ryan's arm and hooking it up to a bag of saline. Ryan groaned, his eyelids fluttering. Hey," the first paramedic said, leaning close to Ryan's face. "Stay with me. Okay? What's your name?" Ryan," he managed, his voice barely audible. "Good, Ryan. They're doing great. Just hang in there. We're going to take care of you." Emma stepped back, her hands still trembling. She looked down at her bloodied uniform and felt the reality of the situation crash over her like a wave. "Emma," Jake said softly, touching her arm. She flinched and turned to him, her eyes wide. "We almost lost him," she whispered. "But we didn't," Jake said firmly. "Because of you." Emma shook her head. "It's not enough. What if—" "Don't go there," Jake interrupted. "You did everything right. Now let them do their job." The paramedics loaded Ryan onto a stretcher and wheeled him toward the ambulance. Emma followed, her heart pounding. "Can I ride with him?" she asked, her voice wavering. The first paramedic hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but stay out of the way." Emma climbed into the back of the ambulance, squeezing into the corner as they closed the doors. She watched helplessly as they worked to stabilize Ryan, their voices calm and measured despite the urgency of the situation. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Ryan's breathing grew shallower. Emma leaned forward, gripping the edge of the stretcher. "Ryan, you've got to keep fighting," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't leave us. You can't leave me." "Abel," the surgeon said, "we managed to repair most of the damage, but the leg, we couldn't save it." "I'm sorry." Emma closed her eyes, the words hitting her like a punch to the gut. "But he's alive?" Ryan's mother asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," the surgeon replied. "He's alive. He'll need time to recover, both physically and mentally. But he's a fighter." Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She felt the tears welling up again but wiped them away quickly. Later, when she was finally allowed to see him, Ryan looked small and fragile in the hospital bed. His leg was gone, the sheet covering the space where it had been. "Hey," she said softly, pulling up a chair beside him. Ryan opened his eyes slowly, his face pale but his expression calm. "Hey, boss," he said, his voice raspy. Emma let out a weak laugh. "You scared the hell out of me. You know that?" "Sorry," he murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She reached out and took his hand. "You're going to get through this, Ryan. We'll get through this. Together." Ryan looked at her, his eyes filled with both pain and gratitude. "Thanks, Emma, for not giving up on me." "Never," she said firmly. "Not in a million years." The once lively beach was now a scene of tense silence, broken only by the distant hum of rescue boats scanning the water. The lifeguard tower stood as an unshaken sentinel, but its watchers, Emma and Jake, had been thrust into the chaos of survival and responsibility. Emma stood near the blood-streaked shore, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The crowd had thinned, but a few stragglers still hovered, whispering and glancing nervously at the sea. She barely registered them, her gaze fixed on the horizon where Ryan had fought for his life just hours earlier. Jake approached her, his voice hesitant. "They're packing up the rescue boats. Coast Guard says there's no sign of the shark. It's probably long gone." Emma didn't look at him. "It's never gone, Jake. It's just out of sight." Jake exhaled sharply, frustration and unease etched into his face. "You're blaming the shark for being a shark? You know how they work. It was just following its instincts." Emma's head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing. "I know what it was doing, Jake. That doesn't make it easier to watch one of our own almost die out there." Jake held up his hands. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just saying it's not personal. That's nature. Emma turned back to the water, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She wanted to argue, to push back against the cold logic of it, but she couldn't. Deep down, she knew he was right. The arrival of the Clearwater Beach Maritime Authority broke the standoff. Officers in crisp uniforms approached, carrying clipboards and radios. Their leader, Captain DeLuca, a tall, no-nonsense woman with weathered features, gestured for Emma and Jake to join her near the tower. "Lifeguards," she said briskly, her tone professional but not unkind. "We need a full account of the incident for the official report." Jake nodded, pulling a notebook from his pocket. "What do you need to know?" "Everything," DeLuca replied. "Start with the conditions, any unusual activity you noticed, and walk me through the attack." Emma swallowed hard, the memory still fresh and raw. The water was calm, clear visibility, no signs of baitfish or turbulence. Ryan went out for a routine perimeter swim. He didn't mention seeing anything unusual. DeLuca scribbled notes, her pen moving quickly. "What about the shark? Did anyone notice it before the attack?" Jake glanced at Emma, then back at DeLuca. Emma spotted it first, a shadow near the surface. "We thought it might be a tarpon or a ray at first," Emma interrupted, her voice tight. "But then it moved differently, purposefully. I knew it wasn't a tarpon." DeLuca looked up, her sharp eyes studying Emma. "And after the attack?" Emma clenched her fists. "I went in after him. The shark was relentless. It bit his leg first, then came back for his arm. Jake and I managed to drive it off long enough to pull him out." Jake nodded, his expression grim. "It was circling, testing. We're lucky it didn't press harder." DeLuca's pen paused, and she regarded them both seriously. "You two saved his life. That's not luck. That's training." Emma's jaw tightened. "We should have seen it coming. We're trained to prevent attacks, not just respond to them." DeLuca softened slightly. "Sharks are unpredictable. Even the best trained lifeguards can't prevent every incident. Don't put this all on yourself." As the interview wrapped up, DeLuca handed Emma a card. "We'll be filing the official report this evening. If you remember anything else, call me directly." Emma took the card, but her mind was elsewhere. "What happens now? Do you hunt it down?" DeLuca shook her head firmly. "We don't hunt sharks. This isn't an attack on a killer. It's a natural predator in its environment. We'll monitor the area, increase patrols, and issue warnings to swimmers." Emma's lips tightened into a thin line. She wanted to argue, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. By late afternoon, the beach had emptied, a stark contrast to its usual lively buzz. Yellow warning flags flapped in the breeze, and the lifeguard towers stood vacant. Emma and Jake sat on the steps, their silence broken only by the occasional squawk of a seagull. "You think he'll come back?" Jake asked, staring at the waves. Emma didn't answer immediately. Her thoughts drifted to Ryan, lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. "I don't know," she said finally. "But if he does, it won't be the same." Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "None of us will be." Later that evening, Emma sat alone in the lifeguard station, reviewing the day's events in her logbook. The faint hum of the overhead lights was the only sound, and the silence pressed down on her like a weight. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and she saw Ryan's sister's name on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. "Emma." The voice on the other end said, sick with emotion, "Thank you for what you did today. The doctor said Ryan wouldn't have made it if you hadn't acted so fast." Emma closed her eyes, the knot in her chest tightening. "I just did my job," she said softly. "No," Ryan's sister insisted. "You went above and beyond. We're forever grateful." Emma didn't know what to say. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than gratitude could lighten. Before leaving the station, Emma stepped outside for one last look at the beach. The moon cast a silvery glow over the waves, and the rhythmic crash of the surf filled the air. She knew the shark was still out there, somewhere, a shadow in the vast expanse of water. It wasn't evil or vengeful. It was just doing what it was built to do. But knowing that didn't make the fear go away. Emma tightened her grip on the railing, her knuckles white. "We'll be ready next time," she whispered into the night. Whether she was convincing herself or the ocean, she wasn't sure. Ryan Callahan's eyes fluttered open to the sterile, humming quiet of the hospital room. For a moment, everything was a blur. The white walls, the sharp scent of antiseptic, the low beeping of monitors, it all felt distant, as though it belonged to someone else's reality. Then the pain hit him, sharp and unrelenting. He groaned and tried to move, but his body refused to cooperate. His left leg felt wrong, heavy and numb, but with a phantom ache that made his stomach churn. A familiar voice broke through the fog. "Ryan." He turned his head slowly. His mother sat in a chair beside the bed, her face pale and lined with worry. Her hands clutched a rosary, the beads clicking softly as her fingers moved. "Mom," Ryan rasped, his throat dry and raw. "Oh, honey," she said, leaning forward. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. "You're awake. Thank God." Ryan tried to sit up, but the movement sent a searing pain through his body. He sank back into the pillow, wincing. What happened?" His mother hesitated, her gaze dropping to the blanket that covered him. She didn't speak, but the way she avoided his eyes told him everything. "Mom," he said, his voice sharper now. "What happened to me?" Before she could answer, the door opened, and a nurse stepped in. She was young, with a kind face framed by dark curls. "Good morning, Ryan," she said cheerfully. "I see you're awake. That's a good sign." Ryan ignored her optimism. "What's wrong with me?" he demanded. The nurse glanced at his mother, then back at him. "I'm going to let your doctor explain everything, but for now, let's focus on getting you comfortable. Can I get you some water?" "No," Ryan said, his voice trembling with frustration. "I don't care about water. I want to know what happened to me." The nurse hesitated, clearly torn. "Your doctor will be in shortly," she said softly. "Just try to relax, okay?" Ryan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her. His mother reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. "Mom, tell me, now." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she took a shaky breath. "Ryan, the shark." Her voice broke. He froze. "What about the shark? Didn't it bit your leg?" she said finally. "It was so bad. The doctors had to." She couldn't finish, but Ryan didn't need her to. He knew. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. He threw back the blanket with his good arm, revealing the stump where his left leg had once been. The sight made his head spin. His leg ended just above the knee, wrapped in thick bandages. For a moment he couldn't breathe. "No, no, no." Ryan's voice rose and his chest heaved. "This can't be real. This can't be real." The door opened again, and a doctor entered, followed by Emma. The doctor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, moved to Ryan's side, but Ryan's attention was locked on Emma. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her lifeguard uniform replaced by jeans and a hoodie, but her eyes were steady, filled with a mix of guilt and determination. "Ryan," the doctor began, his tone calm but firm. "I'm Dr. Patel. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to try and stay calm, so I can explain everything." Ryan shook his head, his breathing rapid. "My leg's gone," he said, his voice high and panicked. "You let them take my leg." Dr. Patel placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Ryan, listen to me. The shark's bite caused catastrophic damage to your femoral artery. You lost a significant amount of blood. If we hadn't amputated, you wouldn't have survived." Ryan stared at him, his mind spinning. You just cut it off?" "We had no choice," Dr. Patel said gently. "It was the only way to save your life." Emma stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. I wish I could have done more. I should have gotten to you faster." He looked at her, his eyes blazing. "Faster? You think faster would have saved my leg?" "Ryan, stop," his mother said, her voice trembling. "No, ma'am." Ryan snapped. "I was out there doing my job, and now I'm stuck like this because I wasn't fast enough, strong enough. Because we weren't good enough." Emma's face fell, but she didn't look away. "You were strong enough to survive, Ryan. That's what matters." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one missing a leg." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "Ryan, I know this is hard, but you're alive. That's what's important right now. There's a long road ahead, but you can recover, physically and mentally." Ryan glared at him. "And what does that look like? A prosthetic? Physical therapy? Learning to walk again while everyone else moves on with their lives?" "Ryan," Emma started, but he cut her off. "No, don't tell me it's going to be okay," he shouted. "You don't know what it's like. You don't know what I'm feeling." Emma's voice rose, firm but not unkind. "You're right, I don't. But I do know that sitting here blaming yourself and everyone else isn't going to change anything. The shark didn't attack you because you were weak or slow. It attacked you because it's a predator, and you were in its territory." Ryan stared at her, his chest heaving. "You fought back," Emma continued, her voice softening. "You survived. That's what matters now. Not what you've lost, but what you still have." Dr. Patel nodded. "Emma's right. You're alive, Ryan. That's the foundation we build on. The rest comes one step at a time." Ryan's shoulders sagged, and he looked away, his anger draining into exhaustion. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "You don't have to figure it out today," Emma said gently. "We'll figure it out together." The room fell silent again, but this time it was less oppressive. Ryan stared at the ceiling, his thoughts a tangled mess of grief, fear, and anger. "Can I be alone?" he asked finally, his voice barely audible. His mother hesitated, then kissed his forehead. "Of course, honey." She glanced at Emma, who gave a small nod. Emma paused at the door, looking back at him. "You're not alone, Ryan. Remember that." As the door closed, Ryan let out a shaky breath, his hands gripping the blanket tightly. The reality of his loss pressed down on him like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. But somewhere, beneath the pain and anger, was the faintest spark of determination. He wasn't sure how, but he would face this, one way or another. The next morning, the sterile quiet of the hospital room was broken by a knock on the door. Ryan Callahan was awake but motionless, staring at the ceiling as sunlight streamed in through the blinds. He had spent the night wrestling with the weight of his reality. His leg was gone. The ocean, the place he once loved and trusted, had turned against him. "Ryan?" A voice called gently from the doorway. He turned his head slightly, spotting Emma standing there with Captain DeLuca and another man he didn't recognize. DeLuca was all sharp lines and authority, her uniform crisp and her expression composed. The man beside her wore a badge identifying him as part of the Clearwater Beach Maritime Authority. "Can we come in?" DeLuca asked. Ryan shrugged, his voice hoarse. "Does it matter?" Emma stepped in first, carrying a file folder and a styrofoam cup of coffee. She placed the cup on the small table beside him and offered a tight smile. "We need to talk about the incident. For the official report." Ryan's eyes flicked to the man with the badge. "Who's he?" "Detective Foster." The man introduced himself. He was older, with a weathered face and a voice that carried the weight of years spent dealing with the worst humanity and nature had to offer. "I handle incidents involving wildlife attacks." Ryan snorted. "Wildlife? Is that what we're calling it now?" Foster ignored the comment and pulled out a small notebook. "We'll try to keep this brief. The more information we have, the better prepared we'll be moving forward." DeLuca stepped closer, her hands folded behind her back. "Ryan, we know this is difficult, but your account is crucial. Anything you remember about the shark's behavior, the conditions, or the events leading up to the attack could help us and others understand how to prevent future incidents. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. Prevent? What are you going to do? Put up a no sharks allowed sign. Ryan, Emma said softly, her voice steady but pleading. He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his tone was flat. Fina, what do you want to know? Foster flipped open his notebook. Let's start with the conditions. What did you notice when you went out for your swim check? Anything unusual? Ryan stared at the ceiling, thinking back. The water was calm. No kittens, no humping. It was clear, good visibility. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. And the shark? Foster pressed. Did you notice it before the attack? No, Ryan admitted. I didn't even feel it until it hit me. It came out of nowhere. DeLuca exchanged a glance with Foster. Did it circle you? Dump you first. Ryan's jaw tightened. Not at first. It just slammed into me, like a truck. It grabbed my leg and pulled me under. Foster jotted something down. Bull sharks are known for that kind of aggression. They usually test their prey, but it sounds like this one went straight for the kill. Great, Ryan muttered. I was dinner. DeLuca leaned forward slightly. Ryan, after the initial bite, what happened? Did you notice its behavior change? Ryan swallowed hard, the memory vivid and raw. It shook me, parred, and tried to fight it off, hit it, kicked it. It wouldn't let go. I thought that was it. Emma shifted uncomfortably, her hands gripping the back of a chair. But you fought back. You went for its gills, right? Ryan nodded slowly. Yeah, he let go after that, but it didn't leave. Kept circling, bumping me, like it was deciding whether to come back. DeLuca's brow furrowed. And that's when Emma and Jake reached you? Yeah, Ryan said, his voice quieter now. Emma was the one who scared it off. She swung that rescue buoy like her life depended on it. Like her life depended on it, Emma corrected softly. Ryan glanced at her, the corners of his mouth twitching into a faint smile. Yeah, that too. Foster closed his notebook with a snap. It's consistent with other bull shark attacks we've seen in this area. They're aggressive, territorial, and not afraid to target humans. What are you going to do about it? Ryan asked, his tone sharp. DeLuca's expression didn't waver. We'll increase patrols, issue warnings, and educate swimmers about the risks. But we're not going to hunt the shark. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Not going to hunt it? It nearly killed me. It didn't attack you out of malice, DeLuca said firmly. It's a predator. It mistook you for prey, or he was defending its territory. Either way, killing it won't solve the problem. Sharks are part of the ecosystem, and removing one won't prevent another attack. Ryan clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. So that's it? You're just going to let it go? We don't hunt wildlife for behaving naturally, Foster said, his voice calm but resolute. We focus on prevention, not punishment. The room fell silent. Ryan stared at the ceiling again, his mind churning. Part of him understood their reasoning, but another part, the part that had felt the shark's teeth ripping through his flesh, couldn't accept it. Emma broke the silence. Ryan, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but they're right. Sharks aren't evil. They're just sharks. They don't think like we do. Ryan turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. You sound like you're defending it. I'm not, Emma said quickly. I'm just saying, if we want to protect people like you, like all of us, we have to focus on education and awareness, not revenge. Ryan didn't respond, his jaw tightening as he looked away. DeLuca stepped back, her tone softening slightly. Ryan, you've been through something traumatic. No one's expecting you to feel grateful for that shark or to move on overnight. But we have to think about the bigger picture. The bigger picture? Ryan snapped. I lost my leg. What's bigger than that? DeLuca didn't flinch. The fact that we're sharing the ocean with these animals. The fact that what happened to you could happen to someone else. We want to make sure it doesn't. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. Good luck with that. Foster cleared his throat. We'll finish up the report and file it with the department. If you stand of anything else, let us know. DeLuca nodded to Emma. Let him rest. He's been through enough. Emma watched them leave, her gaze lingering on the door before she turned back to Ryan. You okay? She asked softly. Ryan didn't answer right away. His fingers traced the edge of the blanket covering his lower body, where his leg used to be. Do you really believe all that? He asked finally. What? That it wasn't personal. That it's just nature. Emma pulled the chair closer and sat down. I don't know. I think it's both. Nature isn't personal, but when it hits you, it sure feels like it. Ryan let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping. It's hard to think about the bigger picture when you're the one missing a piece of yourself. I know, Emma said, her voice steady. But you're still here, and that means something. Ryan looked at her, his eyes heavy with pain and exhaustion. Yeah? What does it mean? It means you've got a chance to decide what comes next, Emma said. And you don't have to figure it out alone. For the first time since the attack, Ryan felt a flicker of something other than anger or despair. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was close enough. Thanks, he said quietly. Emma smiled. Anytime, Callahan. Anytime. The rehabilitation center smelled of antiseptic and freshly polished floors. The hum of machines and the occasional clatter of weights filled the air, punctuated by the low murmur of voices and the rhythmic whir of a treadmill. Ryan Callahan sat in a wheelchair by the large glass windows overlooking Clearwater Beach. The irony of the view wasn't lost on him. All right, Ryan? A cheerful voice broke through his thoughts. Ready to get started? Ryan turned his head to see a petite woman in scrubs and running shoes approaching. Her name tag read _Julia Morgan, physical therapist _. She had a bright smile that made her seem annoyingly optimistic. I guess, Ryan muttered, his tone heavy with reluctance. Julia didn't flinch. That's the spirit, she said, pulling a therapy chart from her clipboard. First session's always the hardest. We're just going to ease you into it today. Ryan glanced down at the stump where his left leg had been. The bandages were gone now, replaced by a scarred, uneven surface that still felt foreign. What's the point? Julia paused, her expression softening. She crouched beside his wheelchair, meeting his eyes. The point is to get you back on your feet, literally. I know it feels impossible right now, but trust me, you're stronger than you think. Reluctantly, Ryan allowed her to wheel him into the therapy room. It was spacious, filled with equipment that looked both intimidating and oddly mundane. A set of parallel bars gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and a row of prosthetic legs rested on a table nearby. Julia guided him to a padded bench. All right, we're gonna start with some basic stretches. We need to get your muscles moving again and work on your balance. Sound good? Ryan shrugged. Sure, whatever. Julia handed him a resistance band. I get it, Ryan. You're pissed off. You've been through hell, and now you're here trying to make sense of what's next. But the only way to move forward is to start somewhere. He sighed, taking the band reluctantly. Fina, let's just get this over with. For the next hour, Julia led him through a series of stretches and exercises. They were simple, lifting his right leg, rotating his torso, pulling against the resistance band, but each movement felt like a mountain to climb. Keep going, Julia encouraged as Ryan worked his way through another stretch. He grimaced. You call this good? Feels like I'm being tortured. She laughed lightly. Pain means progress. You're waking up muscles that have been in hibernation. They're supposed to hurt. Ryan shot her a glare. You've got a weird definition of progress. By the end of the session, Ryan was drenched in sweat, his arms trembling from exertion. Julia handed him a bottle of water, her smile unwavering. You did great, she said. He snorted. Yeah, I'm a real inspiration. Julia's expression turned serious. Actually, you are. Not many people survive what you did, Ryan. And fewer still come in here willing to fight for their recovery. Give yourself some credit. Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening. It doesn't feel like I'm fighting. Feels like I'm losing. That evening, Emma visited the rehab center. She found Ryan in the lounge, staring at a muted TV playing a rerun of a sitcom. He looked exhausted, his usually confident posture slouched with defeat. "Hey, Callahan," she said, sliding into the chair next to him. "How was day one?" He didn't look at her. "About as fun as you'd expect. Turns out losing a leg makes everything 10 times harder." Emma leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Yeah, but you're still here. That counts for something." Ryan finally met her gaze. "Does it? Every time I look at myself, all I see is what I've lost. The ocean, my leg, my confidence. How do I come back from that?" Emma was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "You don't have to come back as the person you were. Maybe this is about becoming someone new. Someone stronger." "Stronger?" Ryan laughed bitterly. "I can't even stand up without help." "How is that strong?" "Because you're still trying," Emma said firmly. "Strength isn't about standing tall every moment. It's about not giving up when you feel like you can't go on." Over the next few weeks, Ryan threw himself into his physical therapy, driven by a mixture of frustration and determination. Julia pushed him hard, her relentless positivity clashing with his sarcasm. "All right, let's try the bars today," she said one afternoon, motioning toward the parallel bars. Ryan hesitated, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. "What if I fall? Then we pick you back up," Julia said simply. "That's how this works." He took a deep breath and nodded. With her help, he pulled himself up, his arms trembling as he clutched the bars. "Good, Ryan. Just take it slow," Julia encouraged. He took a tentative step forward with his good leg, his prosthetic leg dragging awkwardly behind. The movement was clunky and unnatural, but he kept going, sweat pouring down his face. By the time he reached the end of the bars, he was shaking, his breath coming in short gasps. "You did it," Julia said, her smile wide. Ryan collapsed back into his wheelchair, his chest heaving. Barely is still progress," she said. One evening, as Ryan lay in his hospital bed scrolling aimlessly through his phone, a notification popped up. It was a video someone had tagged him in footage of his rescue. The shaky clip showed Emma and Jake dragging him from the water, blood staining the sand. His screams were audible even over the crashing waves, and the sight made his stomach twist. He turned off the video and tossed his phone aside, pressing his hands over his face. A knock on the door startled him. Emma stepped in, holding a plastic bag. "Brought you something," she said, setting the bag on his bedside table. "What is it?" Ryan asked, his voice flat. She pulled out a framed photo. It was a picture of the lifeguard team from last summer, all of them smiling and holding rescue buoys. "I thought you might need a reminder of who you are," Emma said softly. Ryan stared at the photo, his throat tightening. "You're not just a guy who lost his leg," Emma continued. "You're a fighter, a leader, and you're still that person, even if you don't feel like it right now." Ryan looked at her, his eyes glistening. "Thanks, Emma." The next day, Ryan returned to the parallel bars. This time, he didn't hesitate. With Julia's guidance, he stood and began to walk, his movements slow but deliberate. "Keep going," Julia said, her voice steady. Ryan gritted his teeth, each step feeling like a battle. By the time he reached the end, he was exhausted but triumphant. "How do you feel?" Julia asked. Ryan leaned against the bars, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Like I'm finally starting to win." That night, as Ryan sat by the window, he looked out at the ocean. The waves rolled gently under the moonlight, and for the first time since the attack, he didn't feel fear or anger. Instead, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in weeks. And he knew no matter how hard the road ahead would be, he would keep walking it, one step at a time, The nightmares started about 2 weeks into Ryan Callahan's physical therapy. And first, they were fragments. The flash of teeth, the suffocating drag of water, the sharp, white-hot pain of the shark's bite. But as the nights went on, they grew more vivid, more relentless. He would wake up drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest, gasping as if he were still underwater. It didn't help that each morning, he woke to the reality of his missing leg, a stark reminder that the nightmares weren't just figments of his imagination. They were memories. Emma visited him one evening after a particularly grueling day of therapy. She found him sitting on the edge of his hospital bed, staring blankly at the prosthetic leg propped against the wall. "Hey, Callahan," she said softly, stepping into the room. Ryan didn't respond right away. He kept his eyes fixed on the prosthetic, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" Emma asked, her voice gentle. "Define okay," Ryan said bitterly, finally looking up. Emma pulled up a chair beside him. "Fair point. Want to talk about it?" he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What's there to talk about?" "I'm busted, Emma. Broken. Physically, mentally, take your pick." "You're not broken," Emma said firmly. "You are healing." Ryan let out a harsh laugh. "Ceiling? Do you know how many times I've woken up screaming this week? Every time I close my eyes. On back there, in the water, fighting for my life." Emma didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Ryan, that's not something you just get over. You went through something traumatic. It's going to take time to process it." "Yeah, well, time isn't exactly fixing things," Ryan muttered. "If anything, it's making it worse." The next morning, Ryan reluctantly attended a group therapy session at the rehabilitation center. The room was small and unassuming, with a circle of chairs and a table holding coffee and snacks that no one seemed to touch. A tall, thin man in his 50s introduced himself as Dr. Adler, the group therapist. He had a calm, steady voice and a way of looking at people that made them feel seen. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Adler began. "Before we get started, let's remind ourselves why we're here. This is a safe space to share our experiences and support one another. There's no judgment here, only understanding." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his arms crossed. He wasn't sure he wanted to be here, let alone share his deepest fears with strangers. One by one, the other participants spoke. A woman recovering from a car accident described her struggles with PTSD. A young man who'd lost his arm in a workplace accident talked about the anger he couldn't seem to let go of. When it was Ryan's turn, all eyes turned to him. "I'm Ryan," he said stiffly. "Lifeguard, shark attack survivor." Dr. Adler nodded encouragingly. "Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. Can you tell us a little more about what brings you here?" Ryan hesitated, his fingers digging into the armrests of his chair. "I don't know. I guess I don't know how to move on. Every time I think about what happened, it's like I'm right back in the water. I can't sleep. I can't stop thinking about what I lost." A woman across the circle leaned forward. "I know what you mean. After my accident, I couldn't even get into a car without panicking. It felt like my fear was controlling me." "How did you get past it?" Ryan asked, his voice tinged with desperation. She smiled faintly. "I haven't. Not completely. But I'm learning to live with it. To face it a little bit at a time." That night, Ryan lay awake in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. Her words echoed in his mind. Face it a little bit at a time. He thought about the ocean, the place that had once been his sanctuary. The idea of returning to it now filled him with a bone-deep dread. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to. A week later, Emma arrived at the rehab center to find Ryan waiting for her in the lobby, dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie. "Take me to the beach," he said, his voice steady but firm. Emma blinked. "Are you sure? You don't have to rush this." "I'm not rushing," Ryan said. "I've been thinking about it for days. I need to do this, Emma. I need to face it." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's go." The drive to Clearwater Beach was quiet, the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. When they arrived, Ryan hesitated before stepping out of the car. The beach was exactly as he remembered it, bright, bustling, and alive with the sounds of waves and laughter. But to Ryan it felt different, foreign. Emma walked beside him as he approached the water, his prosthetic leg awkward in the sand. He stopped a few feet from the shoreline, staring at the waves. "Take your time," Emma said softly. Ryan clenched his fists, his heart pounding. The ocean seemed vast and indifferent, its rhythm steady and unchanging. He hated it and missed it all at once. "It's just water," he muttered, more to himself than to Emma. "Yeah," Emma said, "but it's also everything you've been through, and everything you're still here to face." Ryan took a deep breath and stepped forward, the water lapping at his feet. The sensation was both familiar and jarring, like revisiting a memory he tried to bury. He stood there for a long time, letting the waves wash over him. His chest felt tight, and his mind raced with flashes of the attack, but he stayed rooted in place. Finally, he turned to Emma. "I'm not okay," he admitted, his voice breaking, "but I think I will be." Emma smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "That's all you can ask for, Ryan. One step at a time." The experience didn't erase his fear, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Ryan returned to the beach regularly. Sometimes he stayed on the sand, watching the waves from a distance. Other times, he waded in up to his knees, testing the limits of his comfort. Each visit was a small victory, a reminder that he was stronger than the memories that tried to hold him back. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan began to feel like himself again. Not the man he used to be, but someone new, someone who had faced the abyss and survived. The early morning sun cast a soft, golden glow over Clearwater Beach. The shoreline was quiet, the usual cacophony of laughter and seagulls replaced by the gentle crashing of waves. Ryan Callahan stood at the edge of the water, the sand cold beneath his bare foot and prosthetic. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared out at the vast expanse of ocean, the memories of that day swirling in his mind. Emma stood beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. She hadn't said much on the drive over, sensing his need for quiet. But now, as Ryan's breathing quickened, she broke the silence. "You don't have to do this today," she said gently. Ryan shook his head, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've put this off long enough. If I don't do it now, I don't know if I ever will." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but you're not doing it alone." The water was calm, the kind of deceptive calm that had lulled him into a false sense of security that day. Ryan's prosthetic leg wasn't designed for swimming, so he had left it behind on the sand, leaning against a folded towel. Walking unsteadily on crutches, he waded into the shallows, the cold water biting at his skin. "Just start slow," Emma advised, keeping a few steps behind him. She carried a small rescue buoy, not for herself but for his peace of mind. Ryan nodded, his throat tight. He paused when the water reached his knees, his single leg sinking slightly into the wet sand. The sound of the waves seemed louder now, a reminder of the unforgiving power they concealed. "Why does it feel like the ocean's staring back?" he murmured half to himself. "Because it is," Emma replied softly. "But it's not out to get you, Ryan. It just exists. It's what we make of it." Ryan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He took another step forward, the water now lapping at his waist. Memories hit him like a wave, the shadow beneath him, the sudden, crushing pressure, the thrashing, the blood clouding the water. His breathing became shallow, and he felt his heart racing. "Ryan," Emma said, her voice cutting through the panic. "Look at me." He turned his head, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Breathe," she said firmly, stepping closer. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're not there anymore. You're here with me." Ryan tried to follow her instructions, but the memories clawed at him, threatening to pull him under. Ryan, Emma said again, her tone steady. What's the water feel like right now? He blinked, confused. What? Focus on what's real, she said. What's the water feel like? Is it cold? Warm? Ryan hesitated, then exhaled shakily. Canes. It's cold. Could. What else? He glanced down at the rippling surface. It's a moving, gentle. Emma nodded. Exactly. This is the ocean today, not that day. Keep reminding yourself of that. Slowly, Ryan regained his composure. He took another step forward, the water now up to his chest. His crutches were useless at this depth, so he tossed them back toward the shore and floated, his arms outstretched to keep his balance. The weightlessness surprised him. For the first time in weeks, he felt unburdened by the loss of his leg. The water carried him, supported him, as if it were trying to make peace. I'm doing it, he said softly, the realization dawning on him. I'm actually doing it. Emma grinned. You are. Proud of you, Callahan. As the morning stretched on, the beach slowly came to life. Families arrived, children ran along the sand, and paddleboarders ventured out into the gentle waves. Ryan watched them from a distance, his mind a mix of envy and determination. I used to be one of them, he said, nodding toward a group of surfers riding the waves. You still can be, Emma said. Ryan scoffed. On one leg? Yeah, right. Emma crossed her arms, fixing him with a determined look. You're Ryan Callahan, the guy who survived a shark attack, fought through weeks of grueling rehab, and still came back to the ocean. If anyone can figure out how to surf again, it's you. Ryan smirked. You're really good at this pep talk thing, you know that? It's a gift, she said with a wink. As the sun climbed higher, Ryan decided to take a break. He and Emma returned to the sand, where he collapsed onto the towel, breathing heavily. You okay? Emma asked, handing him a bottle of water. Yeah, Ryan said, taking a sip. I forgot how exhausting this is. You're doing great, Emma said. Seriously, most people wouldn't even come back after what you went through. Ryan stared at the ocean, the waves glittering under the sunlight. I still hate it, he admitted. But I think I'm starting to hate it less. Emma smiled. That's progress. Later that afternoon, as the beach buzzed with activity, Ryan spotted a pod of dolphins leaping in the distance. The sight brought a rare smile to his face. Remember when we used to spot dolphins during patrol? He asked Emma. She nodded. Yeah, you always acted like it wasn't a big deal. But I knew you loved it. Ryan chuckled. Guilty. They're just so different from everything else out there. Playful, curious, not out to hurt anyone. They're proof the ocean isn't all bad, Emma said. Yeah, Ryan agreed. I guess it's not. As the day turned to evening, Ryan decided to take one final walk along the shore. Emma stayed behind, giving him space. The tide was low, and the wet sand glistened under the fading light. He stopped and looked out at the horizon. The sky painted in hues of orange and pink. The water stretched endlessly before him, vast and unknowable. For the first time since the attack, Ryan didn't see it as an enemy. It wasn't something to conquer or fear. It was just the ocean. I'm not done with you, he whispered, the words carried away by the breeze. Not yet. As he turned to head back, he saw Emma watching him from the towel. Her smile was faint but proud, her arms crossed as if to say, Undisser, I knew you could do it. Undisser. Ryan smiled back, his steps steady despite the uneven sand. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't whole, he wasn't fearless, but he was still standing, still fighting, still moving forward. And that was enough. For now, the sky was a canvas of muted purples and oranges as Ryan Callahan walked along the water's edge. The cold Gulf of Mexico waves licking the sand with a gentle rhythm. He was barefoot, his prosthetic leg carefully strapped and secured to his side as he moved with the fluidity of someone who had once lived in the water and was, again, beginning to trust it. It wasn't perfect, nothing felt perfect anymore, but it was enough. Emma was a few steps behind, her feet splashing through the shallow surf, watching him. They had arrived at the beach early this morning, with the intention of taking a swim together for the first time since the attack. But as they had stood at the water's edge, Ryan had hesitated. She hadn't pushed him. She never did anymore. Instead, they'd walked, talking in soft, meandering voices, sometimes in silence, as they had done on the countless other days of recovery. "Looks like the dolphins are out today," Emma remarked, pointing to a pod surfacing and diving in the distance. Ryan turned his head toward the horizon. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "They always know when it's safe to come out." Emma laughed softly. "Well, they definitely don't seem to be afraid of you." Ryan smirked, his gaze lingering on the horizon, his expression unreadable. He had been avoiding the water, letting his body heal, giving his mind time to settle after the traumatic events that had defined the past few months of his life. But today felt different. Not easier, but different. More like the Ryan Callahan who used to patrol these shores with confidence, who had lived for the ocean and its unpredictable moods. The Ryan who thought nothing could touch him. "I think I'm ready," Ryan said quietly, breaking the silence. Emma slowed her pace and stopped, her heart skipping a beat as she turned to face him. "Ready for what?" "To swim," Ryan said with a half smile. "Let's see if I remember how." The warm Gulf waters lapped at their feet as they waded deeper into the surf. Ryan had always been a strong swimmer, but the fear that had taken root in him since the attack was still a heavy weight. His leg, now a prosthetic, shifted awkwardly with each step, but the more he moved, the less it bothered him. "You're looking good," Emma said, watching him with a careful eye. Ryan grunted, his lips curling into a faint smile. "I'm not sure you're allowed to say that to a guy with a fake leg." "Why not?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's true. You're not moving like someone who's been through hell." Ryan didn't respond immediately. He waded deeper into the water, testing his balance. He could feel his body swaying, his foot sinking slightly with each step, but something inside him was beginning to click into place. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could get back to being who he used to be. "I'm not who I was, Emma," he said, his voice low. "Not ever again." Emma's expression softened. "And you don't need to be, but that doesn't mean you can't still live. You're still Ryan Callahan. You just have to find a new way to be him." Ryan looked at her, his eyes intense, as if weighing her words. The vastness of the ocean stretched before him, endless and mysterious. He could feel its pull, the same pull that had once made him feel invincible, the same pull that had nearly killed him. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust it again," Ryan said, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm not sure if I'll ever feel like I can be out here without remembering what happened." Emma stepped closer, her voice firm. "And you don't have to forget. You just have to decide that you won't let it control you. The water's always going to be there, Ryan. What matters is how you face it." Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as the surf rose higher. He felt a surge of panic at the thought of diving in, of being swallowed by the ocean. It was an irrational fear, he knew that, but it still gripped him. Emma placed a steadying hand on his arm. "You're not alone," she reminded him. Ryan took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the ebb and flow of the waves. He had fought the ocean before, but now it was time to make peace with it, to stop fearing what had already happened and begin living with what was still ahead. "Okay," Ryan said finally, his voice steady. "Let's do this." Without another word, he pushed off from the shore and swam out, his arms slicing through the water with a fluid rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The water cradled him, holding him in ways that it hadn't before. It was like coming home. Emma watched from the shallows, her chest tight with emotion as Ryan swam farther into the water. She knew this was a huge step for him, a leap of faith that he hadn't been willing to take until now. But as she watched him cut through the water, she knew that this moment was something he had needed, something they both had needed. Minutes passed, and Ryan swam until he was about 50 yards from the shore. His muscles burned, his breathing deep, but he felt a sense of freedom that he hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since the attack, the water didn't feel like a threat. When he finally stopped and floated on his back, he looked up at the sky, his body rocking gently with the waves. For a few moments, everything was still. The fear, the guilt, the anger, all of it was far behind him, lost somewhere in the past. He was just Ryan, just a man in the water. "You cunt." Emma's voice reached him from the shore, light and teasing but filled with concern. "Yeah," Ryan replied, his voice strong for the first time in a long while. "I think I am." Ryan swam back to the shore, his arms strong and steady, every stroke feeling more natural than the last. As he reached the shallows, he stood, his prosthetic legs sinking into the sand. Emma was waiting for him, a smile on her face that reflected pride and relief. "You did it," she said, her voice almost in awe. Ryan grinned. "Yeah, I guess I did." He sat on the wet sand, panting slightly, his chest rising and falling with exertion. For the first time in months, he felt the familiar sensation of peace that the ocean had once given him. It was a peace he thought he had lost forever, but now it was here again, washing over him like the waves that rolled in gently at his feet. "You're not just back in the water," Emma said, sitting next to him. "You're back with yourself." Ryan looked at her, his eyes searching for words. He had come so far physically, emotionally, but there was still so much he didn't understand. Still so much he didn't know about how to live with what had happened to him. But in that moment, as the ocean stretched endlessly before them, he realized something. He didn't need to know everything. He just needed to keep moving forward. "I guess we both are," he said quietly, the truth settling in. "It's not about forgetting what happened, Emma. It's about remembering how to keep going, even when you're scared." Emma nodded. "Exactly. One step at a time." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the beach. Ryan and Emma stood up, brushing sand off their clothes. Ryan's leg was sore, but the ache was different now, familiar, not debilitating. The fear that had once rolled him was still there, but it was no longer the loudest thing in his head. As they walked back toward the towels they had left on the sand, Ryan felt the weight of the past months begin to lift. There was still a long road ahead of him: rehab, therapy, adjusting to life with one leg, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't facing it alone. "You know, I was thinking about getting back into lifeguard duty," Ryan said, his voice steady and confident. Emma stopped, turning to face him. "Are you sure you're ready?" Ryan smiled. "Maybe not today, but I'll get there. One step at a time, right?" Emma smiled back, her eyes filled with pride. "That's the Ryan Callahan I know." As they reached the edge of the beach, Ryan paused and turned to look back at the water. The waves rolled in with a steady rhythm, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. "I'm not sure what's out there, Emma," Ryan said quietly, "but I know I'm ready to find out." Emma stood beside him, her eyes following his gaze to the endless horizon. "We all are," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We all are." In Wistat, Ryan took his first step back into the future, not knowing exactly what awaited him, but trusting that the journey ahead would be worth every step.